have joined us. So yes, thank you so much. Hello, welcome to this Research Reflections webinar. Your host today will be me, Becca, and our co-directors Cian and Tim will be talking you through some research findings from the last 12 months and looking ahead to what these findings might mean for the next 12 months in the third sector. Many of you will have known us as NFP Synergy, but we are now nfpResearch and really excited to share our new look and feel with you here today. This is our first event as a newly branded company. So yeah, thank you for coming and celebrating with us with some research, and we will be implementing an unofficial tip jar. If anyone says NFP Synergy or if you see it in any of our slides, please do put a comment in the chat and we will donate £5 to charity. So yes, this event marks the first in a series of insights we are excited to be sharing in the coming months as part of our social investment programme, including a new campaigning report, which we will be releasing in the next few weeks. So yeah, if you'd like to keep up to date with us and receive the campaigning report, please do subscribe to our newsletter. There should be a link posted in the chat in just a moment. Some housekeeping. We will send around PDFs of the slides at the end of the event, so no need to scribble feverish notes or take multiple screenshots unless you want to. So yeah, you can share the slides if you wish, and the event will be recorded. It's recording now. Hopefully you're all okay with that. And please do remain muted while the presentations are ongoing, but feel free to post comments and questions in the chat as we go along, and you can also unmute yourself in the question segment at the end. So we'll probably save all the questions and comments for the end. The hashtag for the event today will be #NFPResearch, just like our name. So feel free to share insights, anything that you feel is interesting from today's presentations on Twitter if you are so inclined. So without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over to the first of our presenters today, Cian. I will just get the slides up.
Thanks, Becca. Yeah, as Becca mentioned, we'll be splitting the presentation in two today between Tim and myself. So reflecting our different personalities, I'll be dour, looking backwards, stuck in the past, reflecting on changes that have happened to the charity context in the last well, let's say the last 10 years, maybe the greatest hits of NFP Synergy as was. That doesn't count for the tip jar. And then Tim is going to be looking forward and thinking about what all these changes might mean for charities in the future. I think we're still seeing the preview there, Becca, rather than the... Great, thank you. And I think I need to have... There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to look at 7 important and frankly 7 worrying ways that the context has changed for the charity sector over, say, the last decade or so. First of them is, no surprise to anyone, most important change in the global context over the last few years, the pandemic. My contention is that charities were not a major figure in the biggest social crisis since the war. When we speak to people in focus groups, when we run surveys and ask them how they thought charities were affected by the pandemic, were they concerned about it, most people react with more or less a shrug of the shoulders. So here are some quotes from focus group participants conducted sort of 6 months into the pandemic, so really at the height of the response. I don't feel I've heard very much from charities at all during COVID, issues being raised in the radio and on the news and so on, but not much advertising. So people are not hearing directly from charities. Next one there, I feel like we just haven't heard as much about charities. They've not been in the limelight like tourism, businesses, pubs, restaurants, everything you put on that list. So in other words, people are hearing lots about the financial impact of the pandemic on other sectors, but not so much about charities. When we ask people whether they think charities have responded well to the pandemic, only about half agree with that statement. And this, of course, is not a reflection on the work that charities are doing, but on the messaging that is getting out there for the public in general. They're just not getting that message about the work that's being done. Only 40% said that they were concerned about charities having to cut back on services because their own income might be cut. And that's concerning. I was speaking to a charity yesterday who said that overnight their income was slashed by 75% because of the pandemic. And that's not necessarily something that the public are hearing about as a whole for the sector. Now, of course, lots of charities have recovered their income in the meantime, and that's fantastic news. But overall, charities don't seem to have been a major player or a major factor in the way people think about the pandemic. And that's maybe concerning for the importance of the sector as an agent of change and as an agent for positive change when it's not being seen to be at the heart of that. Like I mentioned, only 48% are concerned about the financial impact of the pandemic on charities. This is about the same as their concern for airlines, and below, for example, pubs, hotels, tourism, and things like that. So concerning that charities have not been seen to be at the forefront. That's, again, in no way to diminish the actual fantastic work being done, but it's not necessarily being recognized by the public. My second sort of reflection on changes in the context is that it is getting harder and harder for charities to get cut through in any channel. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm just going to illustrate it with some results from our Charity Awareness Monitor, where we ask people to think about different types of fundraising, different methods they might have come into contact with charities, and say whether they remember having any communication recently from charities through that channel. The first example is television. In January of 2010, 55% of people said that they had recently heard from a charity through a television ad with a phone number to call to donate. By 2010, that figure had dropped to 26%. So charities were seeing half the level of cut through and recall via television advertising in 2021 rather, than they were in 2010. This is not a function of decreased media spend. Charities are spending plenty on media. They're spending more and more every year, in fact. Media was maybe cheaper in 2010 during the recession. But the challenge is that you have to spend more now just to stay in the same place. And that is a recurring theme. Part of the reason is there's increased competition for ad spending, but actually a big factor is people just aren't watching ads on TV anymore. So the proportion of people who sit and watch standard terrestrial or satellite television without fast forwarding through the ads, without recording it and skipping the ads when they're watching it then, is decreasing every year. People are increasingly watching on-demand services. They're watching Netflix or whatever else it is. And that means that they're just not seeing the ads. And so the recall isn't there for the general public. For different reasons, the same is true of street fundraising. So again, in 2010, 36% of the general public remembered having some kind of contact with face-to-face fundraising on the street. By 2021, that had dropped to 21%. So nearly a drop of half again in the proportion of people remembering coming into contact with any of these kinds of fundraising. Again, the reasons here are different. Partly it's the pandemic and people having less options to be out there on the street and coming into contact with street fundraisers. Part of it is that 2010, 2011 was probably the height of street fundraising when most of that was being done before the kind of controversies and regulations and so on that the public mostly didn't care about, but which government managed to get through. And just there's less activity going on and less chances to come into contact with it. So that's another way that it's harder to get cut through. It's harder to reach the people that you're trying to reach with your message. And finally, they're just not opening posts anymore. Particularly if you're a younger person, the only thing that comes through in the post is bills and advertising, and that's not a particularly enthusiastic, encouraging reason to open your post. So again, the number of people remembering coming into contact with charities via an appeal, mailing, or a letter fell from 52%, over half the public in 2010, down to 22%, more or less 1 in 5. So a really, really dramatic decline in the number of people recalling any kind of contact with direct marketing through the post. And this is just 3 examples we pulled out, but it's true across the board, actually across almost every channel that you could potentially be advertising to the public, maybe with the exception of online. There is less cut through now than there was 10 years ago. And that's really a challenge for charities because the cost of doing this kind of advertising has not fallen in line with that. So it's becoming more expensive just to achieve the same results. Okay, the third point is visibility. And here what we've noticed is that people are just not as aware of charities as they used to be. The front of mind recall, the just general awareness of charities and the work they're doing and seeing them around the place is not at the level that we would have seen in the past. What we've done to illustrate this on this slide, we've just showing 2 things. In the sort of orangey peachy color, we've got the average of the top 20 charities by prompted awareness. So we prompt a massive list of charities, about 120 charities. What we've done is just taken the top 20 of those who we would have fairly consistent data for over time. And that's the top 20 nowadays, so that it is sort of biased towards those charities who are currently succeeding. And we've taken an average of their awareness in 2022 and an average of their awareness back in 2014. You can see that the average charity in that kind of space has dropped about 7 percentage points of awareness. So even among charities that really are household names, or certainly were household names 7 or 8 years ago, there is a slight pattern of declining awareness, which is something that we're concerned about. Similarly, in the sort of dark blue line, the percentage you can't spontaneously name a charity. So we ask people a spontaneous awareness question, can you think of what's the first charity that comes to mind? Now, I'm sure if you took this 28% of people and put a gun to their head and said, you really have to name a charity, they probably could, but it's not coming to mind easily for them. It's not something that they have at the tip of their tongue, so it's easier for them to say, I can't think of any. And that number has gone up really, really substantially since 2014. So it has more than tripled from 8% up to 28%. So more and more charities are not necessarily part of the everyday casual thing that you see around you. It's not something that people are thinking about as much as they would have been 10 years ago. And we also think that's concerning. When we kind of look at some of the reasons for this, it's really interesting to look at this broken out by generations. So if we take, this is a slightly different mix. This is 50 brands where we have had very consistent tracking. So in other words, we have tracked all of them over the time period in question. And we've looked at it broken out by the different generations. So these are the same groups of people, just at different points in time. So millennials in 2012 would have been, well, I think of myself, would have been in my mid-20s. I'm now in my mid-30s. Generation X, a little bit older than that. Baby boomers now into their 70s, 60s and 70s, and traditionalists or silent generation, depending on what you want to call them, that older generation than baby boomers now. And so if you look, most of these groups saw an increase in awareness of charity brands over that period. So in 2012, your average Gen Xer, 66% of Gen Xers were aware of the average brand. That went up to 73%. Likewise for baby boomers, 75% of them were aware of the average brand in this list, up to 82%. And traditionalists as well also increased their awareness from 74% up to 83%. So that sounds like good news overall. But the concern is that for millennials, there has not been an increase. If anything, there's been a little bit of a decrease, although it's probably not statistically significant, but a little 3-point drop there. So actually, for that next generation of people who might consider becoming your supporters, they're actually not aware of the brand in the same way as they were. And this can lead to a situation where fundraising can be going very well in the short term because the strategy is we're going to focus on those audiences who are going to be most likely to support us, and that's probably the older groups. But in the long term, the concern is, are these people going to be willing to support you if they've never heard of you? And if they haven't had that kind of baseline awareness? If you look at millennials now, they're probably about the same age as Gen Xers were in 2012 on average. And their awareness is below, in 2021, where Gen Xers were in 2012. So is there any reason to believe, therefore, that millennials are going to start getting more aware of charities? And I think that is a concern if this awareness of charities appears to be showing this cohort effect rather than a life stage effect. That is something that we are really going to have to worry about, maybe not now, but certainly in 10 years. Moving from the big to the small, and you might notice a pattern that this isn't the cheeriest of presentations. I'll leave that to Tim. Gift aid might seem minor to, compared to the scale of whether people have heard of charities or not, but fewer and fewer people are aware actually of what gift aid is. And I think this is part of the same symptom of people being less aware of charities, less knowledgeable about charities, less knowledgeable about fundraising and why you would want to do certain things. And this is a concern as well. If you're trying to get people to sign up to gift aid, it helps if they know what it is. So to illustrate that again, some figures from our charity awareness monitor. We ask people a set of questions where we say, have you heard of any of the following schemes? Gift aid is one of them. If they say they have heard of gift aid, we then ask them to pick out the correct definition from a list of different possible definitions of gift aid. In 2010, 72% of the whole general public were able to correctly identify the definition of gift aid as a way for a charity to claim back the tax that you have paid on a gift that you make to them, which is pretty good going. Nearly 3/4 of the public haven't been aware of this is certainly an achievement. Really encouraging because it means you can speak with confidence about it. You don't need to explain it every time you use it. But unfortunately, maybe some of that initial drive to make people aware of it has worn off a little in the meantime. Now only 54% of the public in 2021 were likewise able to correctly identify the correct definition of gift aid. So part of this phenomenon of charities sort of slipping out of the mind of the general public is a little bit of a decrease in visibility and a little bit of lack of knowledge about some of the details of charities. And this is an example of that. If we look among millennials, actually, so again, not actually the youngest age group, as I have to keep in mind myself, that would be Generation Z, but among millennials, only 39% can now correctly identify the definition of gift aid. And again, if we think about millennials as now, a lot of them pushing 40, going to be that next generation of donors when they get a little bit older, maybe it's concerning that there is less awareness of some of the basic facts about charities. Okay, for a brief pause in some of the misery, there is good news if you are an environmental charity or a homelessness charity, because the proportion of people who say that those causes are among their favorite has increased in the last 10 years. So in 2010, 10% of people said that they favored environmental conservation charities, up to 14% last year. For homelessness and social welfare charities, that went from 14% up to 18%. So a bit of an increase in the people saying that they like all of those brands working in both of those different areas. Normal services resumed. If you're not in one of those causes, unfortunately, support and favoritism for that cause has declined pretty well across the board. So a bit of a small decline for animals, health and medical, then bigger declines, especially proportionately for overseas aid and development, and very large decline proportionately for children and young people as well, where support has halved more or less. So what we're seeing is that a lot of causes that would have been absolutely top of the list, and still are to a large extent top of the list, are becoming a little bit less popular. And the causes that are becoming more popular are not necessarily making up for that lost ground. The increases are smaller than the decreases. What is worth saying is that there are some areas which we asked in 2021, which we didn't ask in 2010, which might reflect areas where there has also been growth. So things like mental health, for example, and dementia, where we know that these are causes that are increasingly important, but unfortunately we just don't have the data to compare them. So if you're being a little bit more positive, you could probably say there has also been growth in support for mental health charities and dementia charities, but for a lot of organizations on this list, that would be the other way around. I'm going to have to apologize to the chat for all the relentless misery. This is a break from it because this is, I would say, maybe neutral, which is that there's also been a change in the preference for how people would like to see their donation spent in terms of where they want it spent. So this is a question we ask to the general public in each of these countries. I hope it should be clear. 60% of people in Great Britain as a whole don't want money to be spent in Northern Ireland. But where we ask people, would they rather money be spent in their local area, in their own country or nation, or whether they would like it to be spent in the UK as a whole, or indeed overseas. And what we've seen is a bit of a decline in the proportion of people preferring to give money overseas and to the UK as a whole, and a bit of an increase to the proportion of people wanting it to be spent more locally, nearer to them. So a rise of 9 points in people wanting money to be spent in Northern Ireland, 4 points in Wales, and of 7 points in Scotland. So an increasing desire for localism and showing the impact that you're making on the ground near them rather than nationally or globally is something that the public are increasingly looking for. Okay, the 6th point on the list is disintermediation. And this is where people are cutting out the middleman when it comes to doing good. What I mean by this is the travel industry was something that was very successfully disintermediated 10, 15, 20 years ago. You used to go to a travel agent to book your holiday. They would sort out everything for you. They'd book your flights, your hotel, and so on. Nowadays, people are doing all of that themselves. So they are going to Skyscanner to book their flights. They're going to booking.com to book their hotels, and they're trying to arrange everything themselves. For charities, it's a little bit more complicated, because how do you do that good without the middleman that is charities? Charities, thankfully, haven't gone the way of travel agents just yet, but I think it is a concern that people are looking for ways to do that. You can see examples from this with GoFundMe, where people are trying to give money, excuse me, directly to either to people in need or to people who appear to be doing something informally but for good. You can see it in actually other ways as well, like corporate partnerships, or Tom's shoes is the classic example. You buy a pair of these shoes and somebody in a poorer country gets a pair of shoes for free. And that's another way of doing good that doesn't involve a charity, and it feels a lot more direct, and it feels like there's a really good impact. Now, it's a real risk to charities, and it's a real risk to the good work that charities do, because actually, for the most part, charities are the ones who know how to make a difference. They're the ones who can best make a difference. I saw, you'll probably have seen a lot of these GoFundMes in relation to Ukraine at the moment, where people are saying, I want to fill up a shipping container or a van or whatever with supplies for refugees in Ukraine and get that over to them. Can you help out? Can you buy items X, Y, and Z, toilet paper or whatever else it is? And the Irish Red Cross, I saw, had to put out a statement saying, please don't do this. Please just donate money instead. We can source the goods better locally. You won't be choking up logistics channels. You won't be giving a logistics nightmare for people on the ground trying to work out and sort through all of your various different donations. And your money will just be overall way better spent if you just give €10 to the Red Cross instead of giving £20 worth of goods to someone with a van. But that is a really difficult message to get through, because people feel like they're making a direct impact by using these disintermediated channels. To illustrate this, we sort of did an experiment a few years back in Ireland, actually, in our Irish research, where we mocked up 2 different posts, and we used several different causes. So on the left, we used a charity Facebook post asking for money for a particular cause. This example was about Syrian refugees. We also used, I think, floods in Ireland, and we did somebody suffering from a medical condition as well and looking for money to go for an operation in the States. And on the right, then we had a personal request. So in this case, again, like the Ukraine situation, somebody's filling up a van with goods to bring to refugee camps across Europe. Then we asked people really simply, which of these 2 would you prefer to donate money to, assuming that you knew the person on the right. There's good news and bad news. So the good news is that only 20% would prefer to support their personal request, although, beauty is in the eye of the beholder here. It's your own decision as to whether 20% seems low or high. But the concern really is that it's higher among younger people. And again, there's that concern that the base of people who understand and are willing to support charities and so on, is diminishing. It's not necessarily being replenished. And this is something we really want to repeat to check whether this proportion is increased over time. That's something we're really interested in exploring, because certainly anecdotally, there seems to be more and more of this kind of stuff going on. And it comes up a lot in our focus groups as well. Just an example here, quotation from one of the participants in an Irish focus group recently. Look, they said, I believe the money is probably getting to as close to the source as possible with those kind of pages. There's very little verification of these pages. There have been cases of fraud and scams and so on. And there's no reason to believe in particular that money is going to be better spent by these people than by charities. The opposite is more likely, but that is a communications challenge for charities. And it's something that seems to be coming up a lot more, which again, we're quite concerned about. And then, just in case you didn't think I was laying it on thickly enough, my last point is that the public are getting more and more pessimistic. So I'm just in tune with them. The public are increasingly expecting the worst when it comes to a huge range of different issues. So the public really saw 2021 as a terrible year. So 71% of people believe there was an increase in 2021 compared to 2020 in the use of food banks. Really interesting when you consider how bad 2020 was. 64% believe there was an increase in poverty among working families, and 59% believe there was an increase in child poverty. And these are the worst figures that we've seen in our research. So people think things are getting worse, and more people think things are getting worse than we have ever seen. And actually, they also expect everything to get even worse over the coming year. So 63% believe there will be an increase in the use of food banks, 60% think there will be an increase in homelessness, and 59% think there will be an increase in poverty among working families. So I suppose what this means is you're going to have a very easy time convincing people that there is need out there. What you're going to have a harder time is convincing people that you can make a difference in that. And hopefully Tim's going to talk a bit about that as well. So I apologize for completely downing the mood and everything. Just to lighten things up, I think Tim is now going to launch into a long speech about themes of existential crisis and death in Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal.
Unbelievable pressure on my shoulders, Becky, and I think you've thoroughly depressed us all in only 25 minutes. I think you need to take a good hard look at yourself and think, when you're presented with an opportunity to present on all the good that the charity sector has done in the last 10 years, this is what you've come up with. Hello everyone, I'm Tim. I'm the other managing director, and allegedly I'm the fun positive one, so I hope I can live up to that, that reputation today. Just let me share my screen. So everybody see that okay? Is that okay? Great. Firstly, did anybody get Cian's reference here? What was the film reference, Cian? Because I have to admit I had absolutely no idea what you were talking about. What was this?
Seventh Seal. He plays chess with death.
That was the something a bit lighter, was it, Cian?
Well, I just thought anything could be lighter than that last point.
Very good. So I went with the picture of the DeLorean, because obviously talking about the future, Back to the Future, and any opportunity to share an image of this beautiful piece of engineering, I couldn't resist. So I'm going to look at some different ways that charities can evolve in the future in a similar structure to Cian, but I've not gone with the magic 7, I've gone with just 6, and trying to keep things on a slightly lighter note. So the first thing that I want to touch on is experts. So if you remember back to the heady days of 2016, post-EU referendum, and actually in the run-up to the EU referendum, we were told by Michael Gove that the public have had enough of experts, companies with acronyms and senior people telling them what they should think. And thankfully, we've seen a reversal of this trend, which I think bodes well for charities. So when we asked the public last year, so we have 2 really great data points here. The first is July 2016, just after the referendum, when probably trust in experts was at a particular low point, and then May 21. You've seen significant upticks in agreement that, for example, it's more important to take into account the views of experts rather than relying on ordinary people. So some common sense returning hopefully to the British public. And this is backed up by some data we have on the question, which is how much do you trust the views of the following people when they comment on UK policy? And you can see there's been huge upticks for healthcare professionals, scientists, unsurprisingly, given obviously the pandemic, but also actually upticks across the board. And you can see people who run well-known charities increasing from 31 to 41%, quite a big increase, still slightly behind some of the other sectors, so academics, economists, and then scientists and healthcare, but not a bad position. But I think generally this appetite to hear more from those with expertise is a positive for the sector. The NHS. So last week I wrote a blog on NHS charities, and I've already seen a comment from a member of the NHS Charities Together team, and just found digging into this this topic, and I've slightly tongue-in-cheek said here, Britain's biggest charity. what led me to kind of pose that question was just how, as Cian alluded to in our research when we were asking, which charities do you associate as having worked on the area of COVID-19? The top charity that the public mentioned was the NHS, admittedly not at high levels, high percentage levels, but the public were more likely to think NHS than, and then some of the names were British Red Cross, Age UK, etc. And I just think this is a sector for us all to watch. Back in 2019, the Association of NHS Charities, as it was then known, had an income of around about £400,000. And in 2020, the income of NHS charities together was £158 million, which I had to keep checking this as I did the sum, but it's a 38,000% increase, which is mind-boggling, and how an organisation copes with that is certainly, I think, would be a brilliant story to tell, and I look forward to hearing it told one day. But there are some big questions, I think, for NHS charities. So kind of where does the income settle down, I think, is one question for that 158 million. What happens when the public start to see waiting lists getting longer? So Sajid Javid talking about a waiting list total of around 13 million people before it gets better. And also the introduction of the national insurance tax increase, which is initially at least to pay for the NHS backlog. How are people going to feel about giving to the NHS philanthropically in that context? But I also think it raises questions about how people then relate and give to other charity sectors. So will it impact on their, if people do start to give more formally to NHS hospitals, charities, which they have been doing in different guises for a very long time, but not at the levels that we're seeing now. What does that mean for giving to the British Heart Foundation or Alzheimer's Society, for example? You know, what are the knock-on effects of people giving to NHS charities? So I think it's certainly a sector to watch, a really fascinating one. You know, kind of set aside the discussion about taxation in this country and what proportion of taxation goes on healthcare. Very interesting to observe this huge change that's occurring in this space. Actually, kind of one of the quotes on the blog is from an anonymous NHS charity chief exec, who I'm not sure was aware that I would then present their quotes to at this event, but it's all anonymous. But just recognizing that there's obviously been a huge increase in numbers of donors who are giving, but with few signs that the enormous pressures on our health service will improve, at least in the short term. It will be a tough balancing act to encourage donors to give while they can see long waiting lists and a health system struggling to cope. But, you know, one does wonder also, actually, if they see the NHS continue to be under such strain, perhaps that will lead to more people giving, particularly, you know, with NHS charities giving a lot to staff welfare within the NHS, for example. The third area I wanted to touch on was culture wars, which has had a lot of traction and coverage in the sector media in particular. And want to highlight that we feel this is a real political war that just isn't cutting through to the public at the moment. So we've seen a lot of MPs have, particularly Conservative MPs, be very critical about lots of different individual charities for engaging in what they see as kind of woke culture or the culture war. So we've seen kind of criticism of Bernardo's for publishing a blog on white privilege. There's been criticism of the National Trust for their report into the historical links with slavery. There's been criticism of Kew Gardens for examining their links to colonialism. The list kind of goes on. And it's a real dividing line between Labour and Conservatives, and probably Conservatives and then Labour, SNP, Lib Dem to kind of a much more relaxed with this. And we've got a number of quotes from Conservative MPs on the National Trust and other charities in our research with MPs that highlight this. So when we asked MPs, you know, what would you like to hear more from the National Trust about, this Conservative MP saying, which was probably one of my favourite quotes from a Conservative MP in a while, which is how they are going to stop pandering to metropolitan wokery, which is a great line about the National Trust. And there are many that are similar to that. One which kind of references that they've been taken over by Black Lives Matter supporters, and this is, you know, a huge concern for them about the future direction of the National Trust. But then on the flip side, you have this quote from the Labour MP, which represents the Labour's position quite nicely, I think, which is, what is wrong with the National Trust researching the history of the buildings it looks after? So two very different views, but a very hot topic in the political world at the moment. But then it doesn't seem to cut through to the public. And the way that I want to demonstrate this now is just looking at two scandals, if you like. So Oxfam in 2018, in early 2018, as you'll all remember, very critical coverage, and rightly so, of discrimination, sexual harassment by their staff. And this led to 65% of the public saying that they'd heard a news story about charities in February 2018. Typically, we see this score is around about a third of the public say that they've heard something about charities. And of that 65%, 62% say it had worsened their view of charities. So it had a real impact in terms of people saying, I've heard about that story, and we think it's very much linked to Oxfam, and it worsened my view of charities. Then, kind of in contrast, we use the same figures, same question. In September last year, 38% of the public said that they'd heard something about charities, but only 1% say that it worsened their view. 50% said that they did not change their view, and the rest said it was had a positive impact on their view. So it just doesn't appear to be cutting through. September this in 2021 was around the time of the National Trust AGM. There was quite a lot of coverage, at least in the sector, about getting kind of anti-woke candidates into the National Trust, for example, but it just wasn't being picked up. That said, a lot of the newspapers were running stories with it, and Becca wanted me to highlight this point, which is how, this is from the director of comms, tweeted a link to this apology that the Sunday Telegraph wrote, but it's very small on page 4 of one edition, just saying, yeah, we got it wrong and we wanted to correct the record on one aspect of their coverage of the National Trust, but it doesn't get anywhere near the same level of cut through or attention as the initial stories about the National Trust. But at the moment, not cutting through the public. I think it will be interesting to see how that changes over time, if some of that political war, if you like, or confrontation does start to seep through, but at the moment we're not seeing it. So we expect to see EDI remain a top priority for charities. We've really seen this become a focus in the last couple of years. In our future of, we worked with the John Ellerman Foundation on a future of grant making report last year, and it was one of the big topics that came up, particularly by some of the contributors, in this one quote highlighting in the funding sector, you know, the difficulty that they have with boards. So board leadership tends to be 99% white, 2/3 male, and another high percentage over the age of 60. So they're typically older white men. And there is a resistance to giving up power, but giving up those spaces to create space for new leadership and new processes and practices. So a big focus, particularly in the funding sector, and we're implementing now the DEI data standard in all of our research with grantees and unsuccessful applicants, which is proving to be a really interesting kind of analysis tool for looking at that data. But it also means that we're, since 2019, research that was started by Joe Saxton and Cian in research with underrepresented audiences. So recognizing that typically when you do research with the general public, those who have a minority ethnic background or those who are LGBTQ+, typically make up a very small proportion of the sample, and it's very difficult to actually understand their views. And so now we run exclusive surveys with each of these audiences, which a number of you have, a number of NFP Research, nearly said NFP Synergy, clients and charities have been subscribing to. So this question here, which is a really interesting one about what kind of messages work with the different different audiences, and particularly this top one you can see around helping the most vulnerable regardless of their ethnicity, age, gender, sexuality or nationality is the most popular message for those from a minority ethnic background and those in the LGBTQ+. So really interesting pieces of research, and would encourage many of you to sign up if you can. The economy stalled, obviously, during the pandemic, and we believe it's had a big impact on attitudes towards the environment, or at least certainly in 2020 into 2021. And now we're starting to see what's going to happen. So how to demonstrate this? I want to demonstrate this with this data here, which is a trend that we've been running for a very long time at NfpResearch. Cian and colleagues will often laugh at me about this because it's by far my favorite trend. Of all of the research that we do. I love it, even though it poses a slightly difficult dichotomy for participants in the research, but it poses the question, in cases where there's a trade-off between protecting the environment and economic considerations, which do you think should be given the highest priority? And in this beige line, we've got protecting the environment should come first and economic considerations should come first in the dark blue. And you can see that from 2012 to 2020, there was a really big consistent increase in those saying that we should protect the environment. The environment should come first in the consideration between the environment and the economy. So just before the pandemic in January 2020, 55% of the public said we should put the environment first. And you can see through 2021, how quickly that changed when people's concerns about their own financial stability kind of increased. Then towards the end of 2021, we saw it reversing again, still not quite up to that 55% level. And then in December, just a couple of months ago, we've seen it come back a little bit again. And the cost of living crisis is clearly going to have a big impact on people here. And whilst it is a difficult dichotomy, it actually seems to work. You quite clearly see that people do say they would put the economy above the environment. Finally, from me, the need to communicate progress is more important now than ever. So as Cian has highlighted, the public are very pessimistic about progress at the moment. And this is a clear area where the charities need to demonstrate what you're doing. So the need is obvious in many areas, but demonstrating progress is key. So many of you will have seen NFP charts like this in the past where we've plotted on different health conditions, different elements of international development. And here we've kind of got a range of different social areas, international areas, and plotted them on. And what you can see is that on the bottom, we've got have things improved in these areas and will things improve in the next 20 years as well. And there's a very positive correlation. So i.e., if you're able to prove that things have improved in your area in the last 20 years, it's more likely that the public will then think that there will be progress in your area in the next 20 years. So things like gender equality, the majority of the public think there's been progress in that area, and the majority of the public think that there will be progress in that area as well. This is taken from our Irish research with the Irish public. Homelessness is actually the slight outlier where there's a little bit of pessimism, like people don't think there's been a huge amount of progress with homelessness in the past, but I'm more likely to think that things will improve in the future, which I think is an interesting area for those homelessness charities who are here today. It'd be interesting to kind of discuss why that is. You can see there's that positive correlation. So it's really important that you can communicate need, but you also need to convince the public that you can make a difference. So just a little bit more from us. So for NfpResearch, just to say kind of what's on the next 6 months for us. And one of the first things is the Smaller Charities Research Fund that we'll be launching in the next couple of months, which is a pot of £10,000 of research to go to a small charity who bids for it and says, I want to do this project. Can you help us with it? And really, this is just recognition that small charities have had it much more difficult in the last 10 years. We provide a lot of free resources on our website, but as you can see, this is from the NCBO and MONYAC, that income for those micro, small and medium-sized charities has decreased steadily over time. And we're keen to kind of contribute where we can. And then just generally, we have the report on campaigning coming out in the next couple of weeks, which is a kind of a big summary really of all of the different campaigning approaches that charities can take using our research with MPs. We've spoken to a lot of the parliamentary teams that we work with, and kind of what are the different tactics that are successful at the moment with the Conservative government. For those of you who are clients, we're implementing dashboards for all monitors by the end of 2022. This has already happened for Charity Awareness Monitor clients. We hope you're enjoying them. We've certainly enjoyed using them, and then doing good. So we've become carbon neutral as a company already this year, and we're doing more with staff training to hopefully improve the quality of the analysis that we do. So just a little bit from me, but we would now love to hear any questions from you or have some discussion on any of the trends or topics that you've seen today. So I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back to you, Becca.
Thanks so much, Tim. Yeah, we saw a few comments in the chat, more pointing out the numbers of NFP synergies in the slides than we would have liked to see. So we currently owe £15 to charity. But yeah, there seems to be more comments around Cian's presentation, including David being surprised that over a quarter of people can't name a charity readily. There was a discussion about people getting cake, given the sadness in Cian's part of the presentation. We also had a comment on how, yeah, platforms like GoFundMe are less regulated, and some surprise from Rosie on, yeah, the fact that maybe younger people might be choosing them over the more established charities. I'm gonna keep talking while we wait for questions to either come into the chat, or you can put your hand up using the hand up function. If there isn't.
Cian, do you want to take any of those points on your presentation?
I think I see James is asking a question, is he?
Yes.
Yes. I wondered if you had any insight into how things like Stand Up to Cancer, comic relief, sports relief, children in need had evolved and changed in terms of public consciousness. I'm mindful of that dramatic increase you showed in terms of NHS supporting charities, and whether those kind of, for want of a better word, telethon type one-off big hit high profile activities, whether we've seen anything move or change across the time, or you would foresee anything changing in the future?
I mean, I think, Tim, we're looking into that at the moment, aren't we? That's sort of an area that we are interested in, but we don't have the results of that just yet. I mean, my feeling or my prediction on it would be, you know, there needs to be something done to keep those up, because they're not speaking to one mass market like they would have been in the past. Like they had a captive audience essentially, and it was a fantastic fundraising channel for that time period. But it needs to diversify a bit now, and realistically, it's just not going to have the same kind of reach in the future as it has done in the past. But Tim, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think when you look at the fundraised income of some of those that you've mentioned, it's definitely down, and I think that's just directly linking to the fact that fewer and fewer people watch live TV, and thus are aware of the big telethon appeal. So sadly, I think those kind of like big moments where the public comes together around charitable events are fewer. Like they're not as frequent as they once were.
And yeah, sporting events are sort of one of the only things like Bake Off as well, that sort of bring people together for television events in the way that they used to.
You say that because you watch Bake Off though, Cian.
Yeah, well, it's the only thing that we all in the office talk about, isn't it? That you can guarantee most people will have watched it or whatever.
Interesting, you categorize it as a sporting event as well, Cian.
the
fury of whisking.
We had a fantasy bake-off in the office this year, so that it definitely falls into the same category of purpose for us, at least, as I would say, not a particularly sporty office. I think that does pay dividends as well if you can get partnerships there, like the charity Focus in Ireland, who've done very well, and they've had a partnership with the Irish rugby team for the Six Nations, and that's, you know, it's one way of getting an absolutely colossal number of eyes on your logo. And so if anyone can do that, they're doing pretty well.
We've got a question from David.
Hi there. Yeah. Thanks, Cian. That was very interesting, if not entirely positive and optimistic. But I made the comment about the 28% figure, which I found incredible, if I'm honest. I just wonder if you or others think that's due to the fact that we understand, i.e. the people working in the sector, what a charity is, but perhaps the perception in the public is blurred. No disrespect to NHS Charities, but the NHS is a statutory organisation, and you know, but people saw it in a charitable perspective, albeit for very good reasons, during the pandemic and because of one particular person. But I think there's all other examples of blurring of different sectors. You know, many companies now doing their charitable activities through their own foundations. So I just wondered if there's any comments on the rationale and explanation for that particularly, in my mind, surprising percentage.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good point, that, you know, other people are eating charities lunch, aren't they? They're doing all the good with none of the baggage, I suppose, that is attached to charities in people's minds. I mean, I'm saying they're doing all the good. That's certainly how people are perceiving it. I don't need to make any comment on the quality or otherwise. I think we try and be as broad as possible in our question. So I think the question doesn't just say charity, it says groups or NGOs, or I don't remember the exact wording. We try to be broad, but for sure there's a huge amount of confusion about what is and what isn't a charity among the public. Not a lot of understanding. Private schools, for example, qualify. Not a lot of, you know, there is a lot of confusion around organizations like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, who primarily are not charities, even though they have charitable trusts. And there isn't a lot of agreement among the public about what is or what should be a charity as well. But I think it's more to do with the point of other organizations getting in there, and that charity is just, I suppose, becoming slightly less relevant for some people.
I think one area that I could have talked about in my presentation that but held off for fear of repetition, but was just around social movements as well, and how much confusion there is around that being an output of kind of philanthropy or social purpose or charitable behaviour. So, you know, Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, where a large number of people have kind of channeled their energy into. And actually kind of another point around those kind of coming together moments is that they can potentially be a bit more organic. So like the clapping for key workers kind of is a really good example of that. But I've just seen a comment that was, there's been a request for Rosie, or I guess Louise, from NHS Charities Together. I've talked about you, but not with you yet. So, I mean, have I got it completely wrong? And how have you found kind of some of this conversation about NHS Charities Together and NHS charities more broadly?
I think we might do a duo. I've just put in, I was waiting for it. It's always lovely when you hear, but it is a really helpful conversation, because actually I think it tells us, you know, truly where the landscape is, and honestly where the public perception is. Me and Rosie have both joined NHS Charities Together from different backgrounds, so, you know, I will, you know, Rosie's view is you know, in terms of us from a brand point of view, is absolutely crucial. I head up the fundraising side, but I suppose, you know, I was in NHS Charities, albeit a different guise, for 11 years before COVID. So I think for me, I think there is an inherent risk actually, in terms of, and Rosie might tell me off for saying that, in terms of how it has been positioned, and there absolutely is a public perception and a misconception of, you know, the NHS itself. Is it a charity or not? But there's obviously another part of kind of, you know, who we, you know, support and serve is kind of a network of 238 charities all across Ireland, Scotland, Wales, mental health, community, and so on. And I suppose for me, you know, 12 years prior, even prior to COVID, you know, it was contributing, you know, those NHS charities at least $1 million a day, so I popped in the chat, and a huge amount of history of our whole, certainly our nation, is built on what that philanthropic support was. So I think it had been referred to before as a bit of a sleeping giant, but obviously never did we ever think we'd be facing. And I think, you know, I'll let Rosie speak. I think for us, there's an element of it's not going to be the same, you know, and I mean that in a positive light. You know, I think we're all hopeful that we're going to move out of the pandemic. But I think for us, the challenge is actually, how do we tell that story truly of what those local communities, those local NHS charities truly are doing, especially following your talk today about localism. So I think the question before was fair, you know, as in where's it positioned, and that's a challenge for ourselves as well, and how we work in partnership with so many others. Rosie, I might not have done it justice from a brand point of view, but I think it's definitely, you know, to chat for another time to kind of probably talk through the difference of the 2-3 people that were in the office before COVID, and then what came.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting for me, Luke, because you say you've got an NHS Charities background, whereas I've got a very different background. I've actually worked in the past for some of the organisations you were just talking about, Comic Relief, Soccer Aid for UNICEF. So big, well-known brands, very much focused on one central campaign every year. And actually, I've been on the same journey as the UK public, really. I wasn't very aware of NHS Charities until the pandemic. And as head of brand, part of my role is, my role really is to really unpick kind of our brand perception and how we can kind of make sure we do have that kind of future-proofness of NHS Charities and maintain some of that huge levels of awareness that have come through. And I think you have definitely already picked out some of those challenges, that fundamental confusion, so to speak, between NHS Charities and the NHS itself, and, you know, tackling some of those bigger barriers to supporting NHS Charities who, like Louise has said, have been, you know, a vital part of our healthcare system for years and years and years, but actually, you know, helping people understand that so that actually they can continue to give in years to come. And as we move out of the COVID context as well, we're obviously all internally very, you know, riding a wave of wow over the last couple of years, but we're all very conscious that, you know, with COVID not being as front of mind, that could start to wane, and it's our job hopefully to keep that momentum going.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for being so open and sharing, because I think it's, you know, probably one of the most interesting spaces at the moment in the charity sector. I was thinking about kind of comparable sectors, and probably the armed forces sector is an interesting one in that, you know, you have the armed forces, but then a number of charities that support, I guess, you know, a government funded service, if you like. And there's probably some good parallels to look at in terms of who the public thinks should fund those services for veterans and kind of currently serving soldiers and their families, for example. I'm conscious of time. Becca, shall I hand it back? Thank you for sharing, Louise and Rosie.
Yes, we are currently at our allotted time, but we had one more question come in as a direct message from Penelope, which was they were just wondering if there was a breakdown of age for the people who aren't opening their post anymore. Is that across all ages, or is that across particular demographic?
I'll have to get back to you on that one. I suspect it is more likely to be younger people, would be my my guess on that. But yeah, I think.
Yeah, I certainly have quite the pile of unopened letters by my door. But anyway, thank you all so much for, we have one more question. Shall we take it from Judy in the chat?
Sorry, so the question,
sorry, shall I come off camera? I'll come off camera, reveal myself. Just the low awareness amongst millennials. I think I remember you doing something with children a few years ago, and how, you know, the old pest of power and everything, if you can get into schools, you can actually do something. So maybe there's something that's happened with education. The focus has gone away from, you know, I know my daughter was all through her secondary school was, you know, I'm from AGK, she's an advocate for AGK, and she says, they don't talk about charities at school, Mum. They don't teach us anything outside the subject. So just like general societal stuff. So whether there's something we need to do there as a sector.
Yeah, hello Judy, and yes, I think we've had a bit of interest actually in the research with children again, so kind of children and their parents, school-age children. It would be something we'd be really keen to revisit, quite frankly, and see, yeah, what's happened with some of the trends and awareness for school-age children. I wonder, yeah, I'll leave it at that actually. I won't hypothesize, it would be really interesting.
Great, thank you all. Apologies for going slightly over time, but yeah, thank you for being with us for the past hour. And yes, as mentioned at the start, we will send around PDFs with the slides. And yeah, I guess that's it. Enjoy your afternoons, and yeah, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Becca. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.